Look who we got in studio for a jam-packed episode.
Yep, we got lots to talk about. We got the schedule coming out. We got the dispersal draft. I got dumb things to say. I got dumb jokes to make. And I'm here to do it all in person.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, we're going to break it all down through a fantasy rugby lens. You're not going to miss any of it. But Matt, hey, you're here in person. Why don't you do the honors? Start us off here. All right,
then. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts now. Cue the music, everybody.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Bringing fantasy rugby to the masses. Talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode 44 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And look who it is. Matt Yee is in the Fantasy Ruckers Studio. Yep. Fortunately, we're missing one of the guys, but hey, we got you in person, so that kind of makes up for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm here in the flesh. I came here just to mess up all the intros as possible, so, yeah, look,
it was pretty good, man. It was pretty good. It was pretty good.
I'll take it. I'm throwing in some spicy flares in there, the Matt E special. You guys let us know what you think, but I think it was pretty darn good.
Yeah, no, it was a solid, I would say, 8 out of 10 there.
10 out of 10, yeah.
And as if you're watching on the YouTube channel or if you're listening, you haven't heard the big man yet. No. Devin Vanderpool is not with us. Once again, we are pretty sure he's either becoming a full-time MLR insider or he's out there training and trying to make the starting Utah Warrior squad. We're not sure yet, but we haven't seen the guy in a while, but I'm sure he's doing just fine, and he'll be back, I'm sure, quite soon here back on the Fantasy Ruckers Show. I know you guys all listening and watching definitely miss him.
Yeah, I mean, either way, we love to see it. He'll find his way back home, though. They always do.
Yeah, well, hey, you've made the trip to the Fantasy Ruckers Studio. Vandy hasn't been to the Fantasy Ruckers Studio, so that is one positive in the books that you've made here with the commissioner heading into the 2023 year. So hey, maybe that'll be a little bit of a leg up. But yeah, lots to talk about. We talked about it in the teaser. We got a MLR dispersal draft that happened over the last week. We obviously got the release of a brand new schedule that is also out, and we will break that all down to the implication that might have in the fantasy rugby world. And of course, we always have lots of roster moves going on. We always got lots of off-season news to cover, and we're going to break it all down here in this episode. Like we said at the top, it's a jam-packed one. We might be in the middle of the off-season, but hey, things are starting to roll as we get closer to 2023.
Things are rolling, and hey, you forgot some of the most crucial things I think that we mentioned in the intro, right? Dumb jokes and dumb things. Well, I mean, say. So, hey, it's a given. I know it's a given, but we just got to make sure that people know that we're covering those too. We're not forgetting about those important pieces of our business.
Yeah, half of our viewership is here to hear Matt's dumb jokes going through. But when Vandy's not here, it's not the same all the time. But hey, you'll do your best to make up for it, I'm sure. But hey, let's move along here. If you aren't already, let's do some housekeeping here. If you aren't following us at the Fantasy Ruckers, you got to do so right now. That's where you're going to hear first if we are able to expand Fantasy MLR to a whole lot more people. Once that is a possibility, that is where we're going to announce it. So you'll want to be following us at Fantasy Ruckers on Twitter, at the Fantasy Ruckers on Instagram, YouTube, and we also have a Discord channel that we've talked about before. Great community with lots of people who love to talk MLR and other rugby stuff going on around the world, with all the international stuff going on. The past couple of weeks have been having a lot of talk in the community about that and the implications that might have on the MLR. We talked about it last week, how many MLR guys we've seen a part of that USA Eagles team in the Rugby World Cup qualification. So it's been fun to kind of talk about all of that. The link is in the description below, so you want to click that if you want to join the Discord community. And yeah, that's how you'll be able to be first to know if you're going to be able to play Fantasy MLR in 2023 or in years to come, because we've definitely got the interest and the direct messages from people who are interested in playing. We just got to do our job in trying to get it to the people, which we are in the works of doing. And again, you'll be first to know on our social media channels at the Fantasy Ruckers when we are able to do that. And speaking of social media, something that we also do on our social media channels every single week, ask the TFR show. And that is something we reach out to the people and say, hey, what questions do you have about fantasy rugby? What questions do you have about the MLR that might be fantasy rugby related? Really, any questions you have that are about fantasy MLR, fantasy rugby, you want to learn more about the league, you want to learn more about what the Fantasy Ruckers are doing, that's the place to ask. And we've we sift through all of the
we sifted them. All right.
We sifted through all the questions and we try to figure out what is the question of the week. And in this week, we have a very important one. We talked about there being a dispersal draft. So this is a little question to get our taste buds going ahead of our dispersal draft discussion. So let's get it started here. Ask TFR show for episode number 44. What player are you most excited to see play for Chicago? And obviously we're going to get into all the nitty gritty when it came to the dispersal draft of who went where, who was actually selected. And I'm sure if you guys are listening, you have seen the results on social media channels, on all the different platforms where you are able to access that information, because it has been a little bit tricky sometimes trying to get some of this dispersal draft info out to the public. But nonetheless, though, out of the names that you saw going to Chicago allegedly or reportedly through sources, who are you most excited to see play in a Chicago jersey, whatever they may be called?
I mean, look, I think there's somebody, and if you've been with us since the beginning, there is one guy that I have been harping on Austin that has always, maybe not a fantasy impact last year, but has always in my mind been a huge impact factor and has always been a threat to score on the wing. And that's Julian Dominguez. I mean, Julian Dominguez just drafted in the dispersal draft from Austin to Chicago 27th. And, I'm surprised he made it that long, but I think he's going to be an absolute force, especially, new scenario, new team, some kind of like an all-star team of players. And who knows, maybe that can bring him up, not just on the field, but also in our fantasy teams as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Julian Dominguez, at least last year, was kind of a player that fell off towards the tail end of the season. I mean, he had a really, really fast start to start the year, scored a lot of points really, really quickly. But when the tries weren't happening, you could clearly tell that the points weren't coming for Julian Dominguez, at least in the format that we're playing last year. Hey, change of scenery, like you said, playing in Chicago. Maybe he has more of a bigger role in that Chicago offense. Still don't know exactly what they'll be playing with. We do know that the coach of the Austin Gilgronis will be coaching Chicago. So, hey, maybe there's a little bit of continuity there where he knows to use Julian Dominguez in the correct way. So, hey, that's an awesome pick. And I am, too, excited to see whether or not he can translate that try scoring ability that we saw, obviously, on the Gilgronis over to this to-be-named Chicago club. For me, it's pretty interesting, and I had a difficult time choosing between two players, but I think in the end, solely because of this drop that we have him, I had to go with this guy, and you guys know who it is. It's the quadricep with eyeballs. John Ryberg on the other side, hopefully with Julian Dominguez on the wing. We'll see whether or not that will be the case. Obviously in 2022 from a fantasy perspective, John Ryberg a little bit tough here.
You don't have to tell me twice.
I will give you the benefit of the doubt, Matt, though. When you did draft him in ahead of the 2022 year, what Ryberg was able to do in 2021 during that Giltini's championship run that they did have was incredible, and we'll see whether or not he'll be able to get to that 2021 form, whether or not he really does turn back into the quadricep with eyeballs in 2023 for Chicago. It will be interesting, but if there's a guy that can do it, it might as well be John Ryberg, because I'm excited to see what he can do there.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, we all know how I feel about Ryberg, and that's pretty much all I need to say about that.
I will say the other guy that I was going to mention was Nathan Den Hout. I am very excited to see what he does with the Chicago Pack. He was a force to be reckoned with on the Giltinis, also a leader both on and off the field as well. You can tell that he really made an impact with the LA Giltinis, so we'll see whether or not he can kind of bring that championship pedigree, that kind of winning success over to Chicago as well, on top of all the impact that he has from that lock and back row position. So, interesting TFR show question for this week. Kind of gets our taste buds going for our discussion with this dispersal draft. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see all the different faces that we're going to be seeing in a Chicago jersey in the upcoming 2023 year. And of course, we are going to break it all down. But first, we do have a little bit of news and notes to get to. And part of that news is the announcement of a brand new schedule for the 2023 year.
Yeah.
Matt, we ticked it off. We got the Chicago dispersal draft out of the way. We know that there is going to be a team in Chicago. We now know the players players that will be dressing up in a Chicago jersey for the most part. And now we finally get to see who Chicago will be playing in this upcoming MLR season on top of all the other teams and those matchups. Initial thoughts, though. We see the MLR schedule coming out. Looks like they'll be starting middle of February. So fantasy managers, that will be the date, February 17th, the one that you'll want to mark off on your calendar for opening day. I'm assuming our draft will happen a week or two before that. So fantasy managers, do get ready. Do mark that on your calendar. But initial thoughts, Matt, after seeing the 2023 MLR schedule.
Yeah, I mean, they're starting off with a ripper of a first weekend, right? I mean, the Fire and Ice Cup, the first game, right? Atlanta versus the Arrows. And then you also got the rematch of last year's final, Seattle versus New York. So that's a huge first slate of games. And I mean, we got the Battle of Texas as well, the Houston Dallas. I forget what that's called. I forget what the cup's called, but we got the Battle of Texas, matching up. And then, I think those are the 3 ones for the first week, and those ones just right there. I mean, you got to be excited for that already.
Absolutely. No, great way to kick off the season, like you mentioned. And on top of those matches, obviously, we're going to see Chicago play for the very first time, and they'll be taking on Old Glory DC in their very first matchup in week 1. That would be on February 18th of week 1. So that will be interesting as well. A couple notable matchups outside of that opening week here as we go throughout the season. Sunday, April 2nd, we got Rugby New York hosting Rugby Atlanta in the rematch of the 2022 Eastern Conference Eliminator. April 8th, the Seattle Seawolves host the San Diego Legion in a Western Conference rematch. We got the Seattle Seawolves hosting the Houston SaberCats in a 2022 Western Conference final. And then Rugby New York hosting the New England Free Jacks, which was an exciting one last year in the new Eastern Conference final. They'll meet up again on March 19th. So yeah, a whole bunch of fun, exciting matchups. I think most people, when they were waiting for the schedule to be released, they were kind of having their eyes on, okay, where is Chicago kind of fitting all into this? It looks like, I believe, Matt, you mentioned that each team will get 2 bye weeks. It is nice that we do have an even number of teams this week. Moving forward, it looks like that will be the framework of our 2023 season. So we are starting, I believe, according to Brian Ray, I believe, a little bit later than we did in previous seasons. So that will give, I guess, another couple of weeks for the players to get a little bit more fit, get more game match ready ahead of the season. But and maybe even a side note thing, it's still going to be cold, but at least it'll be 2 weeks less colder than what it would be in the cities that are closer to the border.
I mean, hey, look, we can assume that and I'm pretty sure this is how it is. Arrows are away in Atlanta. New York is over in Seattle. Right, Utah, I mean, that not really a big deal, but Utah's in San Diego. And then, I mean, all the North teams are kind of, in the first half of the season, as they usually are going to be kind of traveling down south and traveling down to the less snowy places for most of the season.
Sure.
But to the point of starting later, this is really good for Chicago to hear that they're starting later. I think that'll be helpful for them.
Sure.
And I think it provides us to get, better quality rugby right off the start of the bat. So I'm really excited to see that. And these teams are so different. I think so many international signings. I don't even know, I'm looking at the NOLA Gold versus Free Jacks, the first game of the year, essentially. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, yeah, last year I would just write NOLA Gold off. But this year, I mean, look, they made some big signings in the offseason, some big international signings, and I expect them to be contenders this year.
Sure. And as we get closer to the 2023 year in the new year, we'll be bringing all that out. We're going to have predictions for you guys. We're going to predict how teams are going to do. And then, of course, we're all going to put it through that fantasy rugby lens and really dive into who we think the players are that are going to be successful and take advantage of all the changes that have happened this offseason. Because, Matt, you're right. Yeah. A whole bunch of changes happening this offseason, from the roster moves, the international signings, the dispersal draft, all of it.
And speaking of that, it doesn't stop. It's still going.
It's still going, exactly. So, we do have some roster moves that we do need to go over here. Lastly here, just to kind of put a fantasy bow on
bows on things.
Things. Yeah, we put bows on things on this show. Okay. For fantasy managers out there, when they're looking at the MLR website and really breaking down the schedule, what you guys will want to look out for, again, when you start doing your draft preparations, just similar, and I'm sure Vandy would attest to this as well, don't be worried about bye weeks, right? When we're going into drafts, don't have a worry about bye weeks. Now you're going to have an understanding of who has those break weeks, where and when. I wouldn't put too much effort into timing those so that you have a minimal number of players on bye weeks in certain occasions. Just like fantasy football, we really don't look at that. We really want to just draft the best of the best that are available when you're drafting.
And hey, I mean, look, we can't all draft Giltini players now, so we're good. We're good. You know, we got no team we're going to diversify this year, everybody. We're going to diversify.
That will be an interesting thing to look out for because, in the 2022 draft this past season, it was a whole bunch of Giltini's players. And not only is it that it's not a possibility to draft Giltini's players, obviously, in the 2023 year, but seeing some of those names, I will definitely be dispersed throughout. But hey, Matt, you mentioned it. Lots of roster moves. They keep on coming. Let's break some of these roster moves down. Just like always, I'll go through the list. If there's anything that sticks out to you, you stop me and tell me what it really means for fantasy managers and the 2023 fantasy MLR season. Some of these we did go over last episode, but just to make sure that everyone's caught up to date, we will repeat some of them. Leroux Milan re-signing with the New England Free Jacks. Isaac Solomon that we mentioned last episode too. He's returning with the Toronto Arrows. Lolani Faleva back with the Toronto Arrows as well. We mentioned this last episode. Graydon Bode, he's going to Old Glory DC.
Hey, quickly on this, I mean, props to MLR Stats for getting the Castaway Wanderers logo in there. I mean, look, you're digging deep in order to find a Castaway Wanderers logo that you can throw on your graphics. So cheers to you, Jam Delay.
And for the people that don't know who the Castaways are,
they're a club in Victoria. They always lose to the Thunderbirds all the time, so it's kind of weird. But that's them.
There we go. Subtle shots there. We'll have to ask whether or not Callie agrees with you if that's the case with the Castaway Wanderers. Ryan Mathias returning with the San Diego Legion. This is a kind of a bigger one. Mathias was a guy that did have a pretty significant fantasy impact for the most part.
San Diego's just continuing to bolster up their backline. Like continuing to bolster up that backline, right? Like we were wondering concerns about, Thomas Aoki. Ryan Mathias. We're thinking about all these guys, and now they're just continuing to bolster up, bring all the guys back, and adding guys like Mikey Teo, right?
Absolutely. 100.5 fantasy points for Ryan Mathias under our new MLR Stats points format, which includes meters gained and tackles and other categories that we've broken down in previous episodes. With that new number, he sits 109th overall in the fantasy ranking, so just outside the top 100, but still 100 fantasy points, pretty significant there for fantasy managers out there. Moving on here, Samisi
Paella, you're doing it.
Bay of Plenty, moving over to the New England Free Jacks. John Lefebvre returning to Old Glory DC. Sama Malalo moving to the San Diego Legion from Waratahs. That's another big international signing. Maybe not a big name, but you do like to see some guys moving from significant clubs moving over to the MLR. Rugby New York pretty active over the past week.
Well, they've been inactive in the past.
They have been inactive.
But now they're finally seems like they're making some signings.
Exactly. We talked about Ed Fidow, but Brendan O'Connor, forward, of the year, I believe. He returns with Rugby New York, and then add Benjamin Bonasso, who was forced to be reckoned with towards the tail end of the season, a huge contributor, obviously, for their championship run there. And Chance Wangluski, we love the guy's hair. We love him returning to Rugby New York, so it's good to see him back in the Big Apple in the 2023 year. Couple more here. Liam Hallam Ames moving from the Crusaders overseas in Super Rugby to the NOLA Gold. Another pretty interesting signing there with guys coming from Super Rugby into the MLR. Tavita Langi going from North Harper NPC Bunnies Cup moving over to Rugby New York.
Up the heat.
And then finally we got Tapua Ma'afu Afungia.
Oh, these New Zealand names are going to get you.
They're going to get me. Another Hawke's Bay Magpies player going to the San Diego Legion. I feel like we've had a lot of Magpies players from the MLR.
And did we already say that Nick Feeks is going to Rugby New York as well?
We have not said that. Nick Feeks going to Rugby New York.
That's a big one. And I know, and it's not on Jam Delay's graphic, maybe step it up a little bit, MLR Stats, but yes, Nick Feeks. And I mean, the guy came off the bench for NOLA all the time. I think that is huge for New York. Provides additional back depth if something that they didn't already need. But maybe this says something about what this future is for Wysocki Nahalo, what the future is for Naheed Milner-Scudder. If they're bolstering up their back three, maybe it means one of those boys are going back home.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the thing we got to do in fantasy, MLR especially. You got to kind of read between the lines. It's something that we really try to promote in other fantasy sports. To be successful, you really want to try to extrapolate as much information from the information that you have. And a large part in MLR, it's looking at these signings, looking at the guys that you have, looking at the guys they don't have, and seeing how some of these players slot into their formation. Because sometimes, when you're playing in fantasy rugby, these last minute lineup announcements, things like that, it's good to kind of have a understanding of what you're getting into when you're drafting these players. So it is definitely something to keep in mind if you're considering Nick Feeks moving forward. And hey, shout out to Nick Feeks too, following us, giving us a follow on Twitter as well. Love to see the MLR community hopping on the Fantasy Ruckers bandwagon there and hopping on the fantasy rugby train. It's only going to grow faster if we get some of these players on this. And hey, maybe Steven can go out there and ask some of these players even more now if they'll be starting in their lineups like he did in 2022. Quickly, Nick Feeks, 138.1 total fantasy points this past season under that new format. That was good enough to leave him with a top 50 finish, so 49th overall. Okay. So pretty significant there on the NOLA Gold. We'll see whether or not that can translate to Rugby New York. A nice little signing that happened earlier in the summer there. And now exciting to see what Nick Feeks will do in Rugby New York. But yeah, definitely all relevant now since he gave us the follow on Twitter. We got to give him a nice little shout out here on the show.
Now we got to give him
but yeah, I think that's all the roster moves that we need to catch up on. Got through the schedule. You already talked a little bit of dispersal draft here, Matt?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit, but I'm ready to really get into it. And we got dispersal draft, and I still got a few silly things that I need to say to get off my chest.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's break it all down. And the way that we're going to approach this a little bit is that let's break it down from a Chicago perspective, and then we can break it down from a perspective from the other teams that were somewhat involved with this dispersal draft. So lots of names on here. I'm sure all of our viewers and all of our listeners at this point have had a chance to see the results. Before we dive into actually breaking down some of these players, I got to give a big shout out to a lot of the people who are in the MLR community. That's guys like Brian Ray on Twitter, Rugby America's News, Rugby Morning, Rugby Wrap Up. All these guys who are involved and have a hand in the MLR community, in producing content, in getting information out to the people, in new fans and things like that. These guys were all vital in getting information out there about this dispersal draft.
Yeah, I don't know how they did it. I don't know what, I kept seeing based on multiple reliable sources. I don't know.
Vandy.
Yeah, it's
that's why he hasn't been here.
But I was gonna say actually that maybe Vandy should take some notes if you're
right,
an insider from these guys, because these guys are finding information.
Yeah, where's our reliable sources?
Frankly, I thought we weren't gonna see any speculated results until I don't know, like January or something like that. So I'm glad that it's out. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to talk about it, and thanks to those boys that we're putting in the hard work.
Absolutely. And if you were just kind of getting started here with the MLR and you were kind of just figuring out what this whole dispersal draft is all about, not a whole lot of information out there about kind of the format of this dispersal draft heading into it. All we really knew was when it was happening, kind of the generic framework of who could be selected, the options players had. And funny enough, none of that information actually came from the MLR itself. It actually came from the USRPA, the US Rugby Players Association, which I guess shout out to them as well for getting some of that information too. But yeah, through that kind of I guess format that we had a rough knowledge about, some of these guys were able to use the reliable sources, piece some things together, and we know where now some of these guys have ended up. So if you want to check that out and check the results, it's all over social media. You can check out the MLR Reddit page. They have the results there, nicely done up through a graphic that was put together by Rugby Wrap Up. You can also check out Rugby America's News. The whole dispersal draft, at least I should say reported dispersal draft results are up there as well. So you want to check that out. But what we did, and then we'll mention the names that Chicago also had selected that aren't on this list. But the way we pieced this together, because obviously this dispersal draft was a way for Chicago to get in the league and really start the base of building the foundation for this franchise. And I guess there were a lot of ways that they could have gone about this. I mean, we look at the way that other leagues in other sports do expansion drafts when a new team joins. The strategy that these teams can really employ when they go into these things is you can have a kind of win now attitude, or let's kind of build for the future. Let's collect a bunch of young talent and kind of build the culture, kind of build the club, and really build from the bottom up. Here, after looking at some of these results, it looks like that Chicago is wasting no time. They're going to be coming out 2023 hot out the gates, very competitive. So what we did here to kind of give all of our listeners and viewers a easy way to digest how this dispersal draft played out, the Fantasy Ruckers put a little Chicago starting 15 prediction for you guys. So if you're listening on the podcast, there's a graphic up here on the YouTube video. You can check it out on YouTube at the Fantasy Ruckers of the starting 15 that the Fantasy Ruckers are predicting based off of the information that we have so far about what we think the starting 15 will look like for Chicago. And I thought that this would be the easiest way to kind of break down how the draft went for Chicago. And yeah, you can see if you're looking on the YouTube video at the graphic of the starting 15, it's pretty clear that Chicago is winning now, and they're going to win fast.
I mean, look, it's pretty tough to not look at it by winning now when you're pulling from two of the top teams in the Western Conference, right? You got the Giltinis, you got the Gilgronis. I mean, they were both at the top of the conference. They're both going to have talented players. And I mean, I'm not surprised that they're seeing such a quality squad, at least in terms of names, right? I think the big thing that we got to point out here, though, is that even though that they've drafted these guys, they still need to sign them. They still need to still need to sign them, and those guys still need to agree to being signed. And, we look at this, and I think somebody who's not on here, well, actually, we're getting to the other teams later, but I think you look at this team, and it's really, I mean, mainly just in a Giltini all-star team.
Sure,
outside of some of the guys that were taken later on, like, Kainoa Lloyd and De La Vega Mendia, who, by the way, isn't even available from our news.
Which we'll get into, yep.
But no, I mean, this looks like, to your point, clearly a win now. Because I don't know how else you look at it when you're pulling from two of the top teams in the world.
And you're right about that, Matt. When that's a good point. When you are pulling from the LA Giltinis and the Austin Gilgronis, and people forget these are two teams that were at the top of the Western Conference before all of the shenanigans happened with their disqualification and everything like that. So you're right. They were pulling from, if not close to the best of the best from the MLR. Essentially, obviously, the Giltinis won that championship in 2021. Gilgronis were looking to be very, very competitive. So yeah, I think that was really the only strategy that Chicago really could put forward, and it was probably the smartest strategy in their from their perspective as well. So let's break it all down here. We'll go from 1 to 15 for you guys listening. Again, YouTube viewers, you can see the graphic on our screen here. But at the tight head prop position, we got Lerome White, loose head prop, back around. Lerome White at the loose head prop position, Charlie Abel at the tight head prop position. Sure. Hugh Roach, madly successful last year for the Gilgronis. He'll be at the hooker position. Luke White and Cameron Dodson look like they'll be the starting starting locks for the Chicago team. In the back row, we got McLean Jones, Luke Beauchamp, and Nathan Denhote. And this was kind of a little bit of I had to stretch here positionally a little bit because obviously we know Beauchamp is a very, very good back row player, was very good for the Gilgronis. You look at McLean Jones, he was also very, very solid for the Gilgronis as well. Nathan Denhote traditionally played at the lock position, but towards the tail end of the season, played a little bit more blindside flanker. So I could see him out of those three slotting to that 8-man position. He has the framework. He's tall. He's big. I think he could easily slip to that number 8 position and add all the leadership qualities that he has that 8 men usually have on the pitch. I think that's a pretty good translation there, at least for what the Chicago team drafted thus far. Sidney Shoop at the 9 position. Luke Carty, put him at the fly half position because if you're going to select him with your top 2 pick, I can only imagine that he'll be the one that will be starting at fly half for Chicago. John Ryberg at 11, Bryce Campbell, Billy Meeks at the center position, Julian Dominguez at 14, Chris Mattina at 15, and some notable sub replacements: Robbie Coetzee, Mac Mason, Mark O'Keefe, Kainoa Lloyd, DTH Vandermeer, and then again we mentioned Joaquin de la Vega Mendia, who obviously his status is kind of iffy. He did return back to Argentina. Don't know what this really means. Does it mean Chicago has his rights if he does return to the MLR? Right. Not quite sure. But nonetheless, though, this is your 15 with some notable subs. Obviously, there were some other guys here, but at least from a fantasy perspective, these were the guys that were most notable. Agree with this starting 15? Anything that sticks out to you? For me, I got a couple things. It might be that the scrum half position is looking a little bit shallow, but nonetheless.
I mean, Sidney Shoop, I didn't really see much of his play last year. I didn't really get to watch much. I don't even know how much playing time he actually got.
6 appearances, no starts last season.
See, there we go. So, I mean, the fact that he's maybe the top 9 that they've drafted can potentially be worrying for them. But when you also think about it, I mean, when you look at the 9 who's with the Giltinis, right? His name's escaped me, but he went over down south to the Waratahs.
Right? Harrison Goddard.
Harrison Goddard, right? I shouldn't be forgetting that name. But yeah, Harrison Goddard, I mean, he's gone, so you can't get that quality 9 in, right? And Lawrence also left, right? Mm-hmm. So both of the top 9s are gone, so they're stuck with Sidney Shoop, right? I would expect Chicago to make some sort of moves at the 9 position, make some sort of signing. Sure. And the other thing that I was thinking is that you look at this list and you look at the names that you're calling out. Like if I was a player that has yet to sign a contract with somebody, and there are players out there, once this comes out, are you looking at this and going, oh, that's a team that I want to be on. That's a team that looks like can make a run, and I can contribute. So looking at this, I think it's interesting. The other thing that I did want to point out is DTH Vandermeer. Look, maybe they've signed him, maybe they've drafted him. I would expect him to continue to be the mascot of this team as well as he was for the Giltinis.
and that is why there's an asterisk beside his name. Obviously, DTH in the 2021 year, similar to John Ryberg, outstanding, was a big instrumental part of that championship run. I believe he was the try scoring leader in 2021, and then obviously last season he was drafted high by our league. I believe he was drafted I want to bring it up here,
pretty high.
He was drafted very high.
It was a lot to pay
for first round, so okay. he was drafted in the first round, and it might be the biggest bust of the season. Did not even suit up once for the Giltinis. Talk about a guy that went from the height of the heights, at least from a fantasy perspective, then going to the lows.
He was there supporting the boys. He dyed his hair pink for charity. He was there, with the pom-poms, and he had the mascot. He really had that role locked down. They couldn't move him. He was irreplaceable there.
Well, nonetheless, he suits up now in Chicago. We'll see whether or not he does it for a playing standpoint or from moral support. But hey, looking down the list, though, from a fantasy kind of perspective here, what's so impressive to me is that, there are a lot of guys who had a very big fantasy impact that are joining this team. We're talking about Hugh Roach, who was the 8th best front row player all season long. And again, this is according to the altered format in terms of stats, the robusted or the more robust stats that we've added over the past week. So he's collecting over 107 fantasy points, finishes off as the 8th best front row player. That's a huge addition. You're looking at, Luke Carty, who obviously didn't play much last year, but obviously having that international pedigree. He was obviously big plans for the LA Giltinis. He obviously shipped that over Chicago. But the thing that really stands out to me on top of all that is that center lineup that they got. You got Bryce Campbell, who was a pretty outstanding player last season for the Gilgronis, and obviously Chicago has some big plans for him, selecting him first overall in this dispersal draft. I did not think he was going to go first overall in the dispersal draft. I actually thought his center partner was going to be the one that was going first overall, at least ahead of Bryce Campbell. I thought Billy Meeks was going to go ahead of him back of the year in the 2022 MLR season, but nonetheless, he still finds himself on Chicago, and I think a combo of Campbell and Meeks up the middle, and add Mark O'Keefe to that as well, who I don't know out of the 3 who you're selecting in that starting center positions is going to be a force to be reckoned with. And the way that our fantasy stats kind of shifted, adding meters gained and adding tackles that really benefited the center position. Chicago might be a team that fantasy managers are going to be having a lot of fun with in the 2023 year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a deadly trio of centers right there. And, look, Billy Meeks says it all, right? Mm-hmm. You got Billy Meeks. You're building around a pretty good player that's going to get you gain line ball, and that's what we're looking for, right? And that's what gets wins. So yeah, that Billy Meeks there really hammers down how strong this center core is for this team.
Surprising that Bill Meeks went after Bryce Campbell.
I mean, I don't know if we can take the order too much into it. I was actually thinking that I don't know if potentially Chicago has already talked to some of these guys, knowing that they were available, knowing that, hey, I mean, whoever is in that management team, somebody had to make the pick. So somebody must have reached out to these guys saying, hey, will you be willing to sign with us if we draft you? If it's a no, then all right, see you later. If it's a yes, then hey, then we'll draft you and take the chance.
Sure. And I guess that's something to note as well. We really don't know how this draft physically went down, so we don't know how instrumental the order of all these things were. But nonetheless, at least from what we know, it was Bryce Campbell that was at least the preference at the top of the draft, along with Luke Hardy for Chicago, at least to lock them up early.
And I think the big thing fantasy-wise, what we've learned from this is that Chicago is not going to be another Dallas Jackals.
No, absolutely
not. At least based on this lineup, right? Like, this is not going to be another Dallas Jackals. These are guys who are seasoned MLR veterans and have already made an impact in this league. And they're coming into a new team together and now being able to make an impact on one team, under one coach, under one program, right? Like, this is not going to be like Dallas. This is going to be a team with established veterans, established players that are going to make an impact from day one. From February 17th on to the end, they're going to make an impact.
Absolutely. And you talk about some of these guys having already played with each other. I mean, look at the guys that are coming from the Gilgronis. You got 7 guys that have already played with each other. You shift over to the LA Giltinis. You got 8 guys on that end too as well playing for them.
And remember, like, the fact that they're in the MLR, it shows that they have the ability to get into a new environment and make an impact early. A lot of these guys come through, they make an impact early, they get signed, and they're already there being one of the top players. So this isn't anything new to these guys. They're just going to a little bit of a colder place. But this team looks like something that a team that you can rely upon for fantasy impact, fantasy production. It doesn't look like a team that you're just going to write off and not draft anybody for.
Absolutely. And just to correct my math there, 9 Gilgronis players and 6 Giltinis players in that starting 15. So a lot of, I guess, residual chemistry among those players in that starting lineup. If the Fantasy Ruckers predicted lineup is even somewhat close to being correct. But knowing how past drafts have gone and obviously all the roster moves that have yet to happen, that I'm sure are going to happen ahead of the February 17th start date, I'm sure this starting 15 for Chicago is going to look a whole lot different than what we see here. But yeah, to your point, Matt, basically an all-star team of Giltinis and Gilgronis players. And just to kind of put things into perspective, to show kind of where Dallas started with and where this Chicago team is starting with. Obviously, Dallas under different circumstances. They were all also under the whole COVID things happening, kind of starting from scratch, didn't have 2 all-star teams to pull talent from. But when you look at this Chicago team with this starting 15 that we have predicted here on the Fantasy Ruckers show for Chicago, 172 appearances last season just in 2022 among the starting 15, 129 starts. Add among those 15, 30 tries among them too. Obviously, a lot of them having from players like Julian Dominguez, John Ryberg, a lot of those backs adding a lot of that scoring potential there. But nonetheless, kind of shows you that stark difference that this is a Chicago team that's going to be seasoned, has MLR experience, not only just MLR competition experience, but a whole lot of championship experience too, bringing some of those Giltinis players over as well. So it's going to be interesting, man, and it'll be cool to see how close we are to this starting 15, and in addition to some of these notable subs, and also to see how this fantasy situation kind of plays out in terms of who is actually going to be productive from this Chicago squad from a fantasy perspective. And also just to add as well, with that whole center situation too, I think it's also going to be kind of frustrating when players are trying to decide, or fantasy managers are trying to decide between, am I starting Bryce Campbell, Billy Meeks, or Mark O'Keefe between the 3? Because there's only 2 center spots. It seems to be 3 of them, unless they decide to, push one of those 3 out into the wing. I had no Mark O'Keefe has played back 3 a little little bit. I know he may have appeared there once or twice last season, but I don't know how you're really pushing Julian Dominguez or John Ryberg, who have been so explosive out there on the wings, out from that lineup. But just things for fantasy managers to consider moving forward. You know what I mean?
Like all other MLR things, we'll know, I'm sure, 2 days before the first game.
All right, so moving forward here, so that was the Chicago starting 15. Overall, Matt, you think a successful dispersal draft for the Chicago squad? I really don't think they could have gone wrong.
I mean, it's pretty tough to have a bad dispersal draft when you're choosing from 2 of the top teams in the West. So, I mean, it happened. We'll see what happens out of this and who they sign and who they actually keep. It'll be interesting once you figure out who their actual roster is.
Sure. And moral of the story, I guess, to put a big overarching theme on it, at the very least, I think we can say that Chicago is going to be a whole lot more fantasy productive than what the Dallas Jackals were in their first season. I think we can expect a whole lot more fantasy-wise from this team than maybe what that could have been with other expansion or dispersal drafts. I think a lot of the stars align.
We can say that. We're probably going to end up eating our words, though. So.
I don't know, man. No, dude, dude, you can't. This team will be fantasy relevant.
I mean, look. I'm not going to say, look, we said John Ryberg was going to be fantasy relevant, but John Ryberg is also, a trash can with legs. So, like, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know how, the only speculation I have is I don't know who actually is going to sign. You can draft all these guys. If you end up keeping only 7 or 8 of them, this is a whole different team that we're looking at. So, I think it's a lot different. Also, this is all speculation. As much as we hope.
Okay, so let's say this. Let's say this. If this is the 15 that takes the field next season, is this team going to be fantasy productive? Because I don't think fantasy managers want to hear from you, Matt, that I don't know. Is this team going to be fantasy productive? If Bryce Campbell, if Billy Meeks are in that center back line, if they got Luke Carty at that fly high position, is Chicago going to be competitive enough to score you points on a weekend? Are you going to be confident going into a weekend with Billy Meeks, Bryce Campbell, as confident as you were, let's say, when Billy Meeks was going with the Giltinis last season or things like that? You think?
I mean, right now, I'm going to hold the same confidence in Billy Meeks, but after game 1, we'll have to find out because we'll just have to see how well this team is working together, what the coaching staff is doing in terms of using their players, utilizing the talent, and understanding what kind of skill set that they got on their team.
Sure. But I mean,
yes,
it's positive though. It's positive
that this is a lot better start. When you're looking at this on paper, you're seeing fantasy production all across the board.
Right. Obviously, we can't predict whether or not this is going to be 100% the case. But that being said, I think I can confidently say that I think the arrow is pointing up. That I don't think fantasy managers need to go into the draft in 2023 and be like, hey, maybe I shouldn't touch Chicago players because I'm not too sure. I think with your whole point about having this ambiguity and having this unknown, I think that falls over all 12 teams in the MLR. You're not going to have any more confidence going into a draft selecting Billy Meeks on Chicago than you will if, let's say, a center on, Houston, or anything like true. That. I think there still is the same uncertainty that lies, at least the way that the dispersal draft has played out. So, that's from a Chicago perspective. I guess somewhat fantasy relevant. We'll see whether or not that comes to fruition. But now let's shift over, Matt, and let's start talking about other guys that were impacted by this dispersal draft. It was just not Chicago picking. No. Again, not too sure how the order of all this and how the things of other teams selecting and the order in which they were able to select and things like that. I'm not too sure how that played out. It's interesting enough that some teams didn't even pick. Old Glory DC didn't have any picks in there.
Yeah, so is it that they didn't pick or that we don't know their pick?
No idea. And I've heard rumors about, if they didn't declare any players in that draft, then they wouldn't be eligible to take part in the draft. But I didn't see any rules from the USRPA that said anything about that. So whole lot of speculation, a whole lot of rumors. Nonetheless, we do have, I guess, a reported understanding of where some of these players are going. So have a look at the graphic here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, popped up some notable dispersal draft picks from the dispersal draft that aren't a part of Chicago. We got Jordan Traynor moving to NOLA from the Giltinis, Michael DeWall moving to the Dallas Jackals from the Gilgronis, Hanko Gramicius going from the Giltinis to Houston, Connor Mooneyham going to Rugby Atlanta, Dominic Akina going to Houston, Ben Lesage going to New England, Christian Poitevin to Rugby Atlanta, Atlanta, and Tom Mitchell to Dallas. These are just some of the names that I thought, at least from a fantasy perspective, were notable and of note to talk about. Anyone on this list really pop out to you in terms of a guy that is really going to be able to take his fantasy production to that next level because he's finding himself on a brand new team?
Yeah, I mean, the first guy that comes to mind for me is Ben Lesage. I mean, Ben Lesage is moving to a great team, to another absolutely great team in the New England Free Jacks. And not just that, it looks like the New England Free Jacks, you know how we have, the New York All Blacks, we got the,
the Saber Box.
The Saber Box, yes. And then we got, Toronto is seemingly drafting a lot of South Americans and Canadians. But look, watch out, Toronto. New England Free Jacks are now the New England Free Canadians because they are drafting not just Ben Lesage, who is going to make a huge impact on that New England team. Mm-hmm. New England has a new 10 that they just signed this offseason. They lost Bodine Waka, which is fine. They replace that, and they bring in a really good center that's allowing to bolster that back line, which, a center combo that they've already had success with. Ben Lesage just adds to that even more.
Sure.
Not only Ben Lesage, right? They also get the Justice Sears-Duru.
That's true.
Which adds just more Canadian impact. And they're not just getting some of the, the Canadian players. They're getting some notable Canadian players that are, staples in the Canadian rugby program. So this is big. New England, I think, just gets better with this at not just prop, but also at the center position.
And I apologize to all the front row players out there. You might notice on this notable Dispersal draft picks list, I had to leave out a lot of the front row players. Not necessarily as fantasy relevant as some of these other players, but yeah, players like the Justice Sears-Duru on that list that may increase that fantasy output that will be joining New England, which should be very interesting. But yeah, I know I love that Ben Lesage pick. I think it's gonna be very interesting. It's a guy that came from Toronto, goes to the Guiltinis in hopes of getting some increase on a good team, looking to play with some pretty high level players, and obviously all this stuff has
and
happened
continue winning, right? Continuing having the opportunity to continue to win games. I mean, he's experienced that with the Guiltinis. I think it's great for him to be able to go into an environment where they have the same goal, win an MLR Shield.
Right, and he'll go into New England. Again, they're losing Bodine Waka, but again, you could argue that maybe the offensive production for that team has got to go somewhere. So maybe it shifts over to Ben Lesage's favor. He is a very, very offensively high-powered player. He can really have that try-scoring ability. We saw it last year in spurts with the Guiltinis. Just didn't seem he was able to get his footing, battling, I believe it was an injury towards the first part of the season, not being really involved with them. But he'll be joining a back line right now. Last season, we had Wayne Vanderbank and LaRue Milan, who were at the center positions. The New England Free Jacks just re-signed LaRue Milan. So again, I think we have a similar to the Chicago situation. You might have a trio of centers that may be rotating in that position based off of injuries, based off of health. But yeah, another center back line that is looking pretty good between Wayne Vanderbank, LaRue Milan, and Ben Lesage.
That back line is looking sneaky good. I mean, they also got Mitch Wilson sitting at the back, who's also getting caps for the U.S. So it's looking like a sneaky good backline over there in New England, and Ben Lesage just adds to that. And, regardless of the rotation, I think he's going to make a big impact. Just the way that he is, the type of style that he plays, he'll make gain line. He'll get the meters gained. He'll also hit the breakdowns when he needs to. So just a really all-rounded center that's really going to be productive both fantasy-wise and for the New England Free Jacks.
Sure, and this was obviously Ben Lesage, a guy who I believe missed portions of last season, but was still able to finish off as the 21st best center last year. So
definitely missed some games.
Definitely missed some games. He played the first three or 4 weeks with that bye slot in there, and then he missed, I think, 4 weeks, like about a month in between there with injury there. That was the time that we remembered, and then he returned for the Guiltinis. But yeah, it's 21st overall center, which is pretty solid. For me, if I'm looking at this list, I gotta say I'm pretty excited to see what Hanko Gramicius does. Towards the tail end of the Guiltinis campaign, he was really, really dominant. There were some performances in there where he went off, and I can't remember exactly what weeks it was. I'm just pulling it up here, but I believe Hanko Gramicius, I mean, he had some performances that were definitely in the double-digit range. And if we can see that,
knocking people people out.
On a Houston SaberCats squad. He was knocking people out. Houston SaberCats squad who did utilize the back row pretty heavily, if I recall correctly. We'll see how Hanko is able to kind of slot in there. And his explosive ability, he might be able to thrive in that Houston back row group.
Yeah, and some sleeper picks. I mean, first of all, I just want to speak quickly to Tom Mitchell. Mm-hmm. Tom Mitchell, he comes over to enjoy the sunshine in LA. Be with his boys, be with some of the Australian, the Wallaby internationals, comes over, wants to enjoy the sun. Team folds. Now he's shipped off to Dallas. And I'm thinking in my head, there is no way that Tom Mitchell decides to sign with Dallas, even though he got drafted. I mean, there is just absolutely no way. This guy did not come off a legendary Sevens career just to come and be in last place in the MLR, right? Like,
I mean, to be fair, if he does stick with Dallas, that would say a lot about where the MLR is going, and people are willing to just be a part of it, I guess.
Yeah, that would say that, but look, I mean,
sure.
I
put him on there. I put him on there because
it is. I'm glad you put him on there.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out the fact that he's on there is the fact that there is no way that he's going to Dallas. I'm calling it right now. He's not signing with Dallas. I'm sorry.
We'll see. We'll see whether or not. But nonetheless, though, if he does move to Dallas, I think he would be someone to look at fantasy wise. Yes, you're on a poor team, but I mean, you're a guy that's probably going to see the ball a lot out there on the wing. They're going to feed you.
Look at Eric Naposki, right?
Exactly. It's still guys on that Dallas Jackals team, despite them struggling a little bit in portions of last season. There is still some fantasy value that you can have in certain areas, and Tom Mitchell, I think, would definitely be one of those guys if he was to play with the Jackals in 2023. But some cool names there.
Can I throw in another sleeper here?
It's another sleeper.
It's not on the list. But Will Chambers to Nola Gold.
Okay.
Will Chambers is we saw him last year. He had his games. He definitely had his games. And Nola Gold, again, like I said at the start of the show and when we were talking about, Nola Gold is a team that is progressing. I mean, they just picked up Jordan Trainer there at 15, right? Now we're looking at Will Chambers on the wing. They gave up Nick Feeks, but yes, we get two back threes that are, one's an international, has played overseas, played in the NPC Bunnings Cup, right? And then we got Will Chambers as well, who's just an absolute force to be reckoned with on the wing. And I mean, I love that pickup by them. I see Will Chambers now having more fantasy impact than he already had, right? And also Jordan Trainer as well.
Yeah, Jordan Trainer's a good one because I think, Will Chambers definitely. Jordan Trainer, a guy that we saw pretty pivotal at that fullback position for the Giltinis. Nola obviously will like to have a guy that they can count on with that. Trainer could be that guy that slots in there. But all these guys, I think, when I look at this list, all get bump ups, I think, towards the teams that they're going. Or at least to put it differently, because it's hard to say that they get bump up because it's hard to, I guess, really say that you're moving on to a better situation outside the ownership group from the Giltinis because they were such a successful club and such a talented group. But I will say that I don't think anyone on this list has necessarily taken a hit outside of maybe the guys that are going to the Dallas Jackals that have necessarily taken a hit fantasy wise. I'm not drafting these guys any lower because they're not on the Giltinis. I think Nola is still a great fit for Jordan Trainer. I think Houston's a great fit for Hanko. I think Connor Mooneyham, if he slots in that starting lineup for Rugby Atlanta, he was the first overall pick for a reason. Rugby Atlanta is explosive. They're talented. I think he can do well there. Dominic Akina, Houston SaberCats, he didn't have that much playing time on the Gilgronis, and we'll get into more of it. Vandy really likes him, and we'll see whether or not he can establish on Houston. But at least he has a better opportunity now on Houston to really make a difference. And then talk about Christian Poitevin, a guy that was really successful for the Giltinis. I think Rugby Atlanta, with how successful their forward pack is, and we know how dominant they are, or like to be around the scrum, around the pack, Poitevin would slot right in there. I don't think anyone has necessarily taken a fantasy hit on this list, at least that we see.
I mean, to be honest, I think that anybody who's going to Dallas or teams like Dallas are probably getting a boost. I mean, you're looking at teams that,
fair enough,
that guys that are on teams that have established guys. You look at Tom Mitchell, didn't start every game, came off the bench. Michael DeWall, same thing with him, right? Like, these guys are now going to get an opportunity and are drafted to be starters on that team and to add to that team. So these guys, I think, if anything, are providing almost a more reason to draft them simply because the team got better and the team got better because they were drafted those teams.
Sure.
And those guys are going to get opportunities.
Yeah, and we'll see. And I think you're right. It's that conversation between, I guess, opportunity versus the talent that has surrounded you.
Yep.
It's also it's a conversation and an argument that happens in all fantasy sports. Is a guy still fantasy relevant even though he's on a poor team, but just the sheer amount of volume, the sheer number of opportunities he gets, does that outweigh him being on that poor team? And hey, maybe we'll see that with Michael Del Wall, and if Tom Mitchell stays, with Tom Mitchell as well. So that should be interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, overall, man, I think it was an interesting dispersal draft. Again, would have liked to have some more clarification from the league about how this all went down.
Yeah.
It would have been nice to have kind of on as we went, kind of updates and things like that from the official MLR social page. Again, though, thank you to all of the MLR community members. I really do think that MLR needs to give a big shout out to you guys. Rugby Morning, Rugby Wrap Up, Brian Ray, Rugby America's News for doing the legwork that really the league should have been doing, in terms of getting this information out there. And obviously it helps us to be able to break this all down and turn it into a fantasy rugby conversation, which has really been great. But yeah, overall thoughts, I mean, it's going to be an interesting 2023 year. I think it was already a season that we were going into that was going to be interesting with all the international signings that we've seen and how excited we are to see how they make a fantasy impact within the MLR with such a whole bunch of names. I think that's what's going to be interesting for this 2023 draft, is that there's going to be a lot of guys that don't have MLR pass to base your picks off of. I think a lot of the guys that you guys picked in 2022 were guys that were so successful in that 2021 season. You know what I mean? Guys like John Ryberg, guys like DTH Vandermeer, guys like Angus Cottrell. Those guys that were so successful that previous year, and using those MLR numbers really shaped the way that you approach 2022.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can say the same with the international signings about that, because they don't obviously have the MLR stats to kind of gauge that off of. And then throw a brand new team and this dispersal draft in it. Man, I think it's going to be an interesting way that people approach this fantasy season this upcoming year.
Yeah, I mean, my big takeaway is the fact that all the teams look different. Every team that we are looking at, they look different in, for the most part, in major ways. And I think that, the fact that players have new opportunities, teams have new players, I think it just leaves more to the unknown about, is that guy going to be the same on this team? What's going to happen to that guy's opportunities because they signed this guy? So I think there's a lot of questions to be answered. I'm excited to see, once we get all the rosters out, at least what we know of the rosters, once we get those out, really, really excited to dive right into this and really start making predictions on who's going to go where and what's going to go what.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And let's to wrap up this dispersal draft conversation, if you had to pick one player here, Matt, that you're most excited about, and out of any of the players that were selected for Chicago, not for Chicago, but the guy that you think is going to get the biggest boost or look the best from a fantasy perspective because of this dispersal draft, who are you picking?
You know what? And I already talked about Ben Lesage. I was going to go Ben Lesage before the show when I was thinking about this. But now that I'm taking a closer look at the list, I'm going to go with the flyer, Will Chambers to Nola Gold. He's going to have a massive boost on the wing. He's going to have massive impact for Nola Gold. That Nola Gold team is going to be different. That Nola Gold team is going to be successful. And that Nola Gold team is going to let Will Chambers eat.
Yeah, no, that's a great pick, and you convinced me when you were talking about how good he was before that, and shifting up to a new opportunity. It's going to be exciting to see what he does with the Nola Gold. Vandy actually sent me his most exciting pick, so he is still doing some legwork out there wherever he may be. Still very super excited for this upcoming fantasy rugby season, and he told me that he's most excited for Dominic Aquina, and I know this is a guy that he has a little bit of a soft spot for.
Yeah, of course he does.
Electric athlete. Guy was watching highlights of him before he even knew what fantasy rugby was and how rugby was being played. So Aquina has had a special place in Vandy's heart from the get-go. But that put aside, though, he had some valid points. Aquina, like I said, is a very super electric athlete. Just didn't get the opportunity that maybe he was a thought to be getting when Vandy drafted him and things like that. But I think in a new opportunity, moving over and going to Houston, I know they have Lauritz Vanderskiff there at that center position, so it might be a little bit of an adjustment period to get Aquina.
But he can play back row too.
You can't. He has had that back row experience
But Houston
too.
also has a lot of back rows.
They also have a lot of back rows. But nonetheless, I think Akina is going to have the opportunity in front of him to show off the talent that he does have. He has the potential to kind of be that, take that step up from a fantasy perspective. Wasn't really fantasy relevant last year. Maybe with the new stats, meters gained, he's able to kind of interject himself into that a little bit more. But I think joining Houston can only help Dominic Akina's case than what we saw over with the Austin Gilgronis.
Good pick, fan.
Yeah, good pick. 2 sleeper picks there by you guys. I think you can't be giving the fantasy managers too much.
His guy's like half asleep. My guy is sleeping in dreamland.
All right, so I'll give you my pick. I was most excited about. I said it at the top of the show briefly. Nathan Den Hout is a guy that I'm really, really super excited for. Another guy I'm excited for, Hanko Gramicius. I mentioned it in that list there. Electric on the Guillotini. Super excited to see what he does on Houston. But a guy that I'm actually also, I guess, because we're going with the whole sleeper kind of mantra here in the direction, I want to say Kainoa Lloyd. He's a guy that saw a brief number of opportunity there on the San Diego Legion. I've seen him play in Mississauga with Streetsville. I've seen him play at the Ontario level, and then I've seen him obviously move on and play at the national level for Canada. And then seeing what he was able to do in his brief time with San Diego, the talent is there. He just needs that opportunity. And obviously ahead of him is John Ryberg and Julian Dominguez. But injuries happen. There's always that chance. And I think Kainoa Lloyd, with a brand new opportunity, moving away from what was a very deep San Diego team, I felt like, going to a brand new squad on Chicago, I think it'll give the opportunity for Kainoa Lloyd to really establish his roots and, hey, maybe make a name for himself in Chicago and then take that step to become fantasy relevant. So kind of a few easy picks there for you, and then a sleeper pick from all of us as well. And obviously from the top, though, I think to be most successful, I'm going to say I think Bill Meeks is going to tear it up on Chicago.
That's an easy pick.
It is an easy pick.
We don't make easy picks on this show. We make the hard ones.
I will say though, and I don't know if you want to bet on this. I am willing to say that I think Bill Meeks, even though I guess he was quote unquote selected out of preference behind Bryce Campbell for Chicago, finishes with more fantasy points at the end of the 2023 year over Bryce Campbell.
Yeah, okay, that's not that hard of a prediction to make. That's a pretty easy prediction here.
Why?
Well, it's Billy Meeks. He just won back of the year.
I know, but why would Bryce Campbell be selected so... You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, Austin has a vision.
I don't think we need to take the picks into this than where they were picked. Billy Meeks is Billy Meeks, regardless. I mean, look, we weren't saying Bryce Campbell's name all last year. No, we said Billy Meeks' name every game because
it's surprising to me that I don't know. I'm really shocked that Billy Meeks was not the first guy taken off the board, I guess. But nonetheless, it should be interesting. Again, dispersal draft schedule's now out. We're rolling closer to this 2023 year, and there's still a lot of moving parts that are going to shape the way that fantasy rugby managers are going to approach this MLR season. And we're only trying to digest it here week in, week out. We're going to continue trying to do that for you guys, because by draft time, whenever that may happen, which we will have an announcement soon about, we want to make sure that everyone has all the information they need to make sure they're making solid picks when it comes to the 2023 year, to not have a season like Vandy and Matt like they did in 2022, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope the other guys have a little less information than what I have, but we'll find out. All
right. Well, I guess it's about time to wrap up the show here, but I do have one more thing that I want to let the people know who are watching and who are listening as well. And it's something that we haven't heard in for a while, but let's bring it back. The season's coming up, so it's coming back. So we got to bring this back soon.
Oh no.
That's right. Hear ye, hear ye. Commissioner Yee is back, baby. And we got some announcements to make. Like we said, we're about, what? It's November 16th when this episode is coming out. So we're about, what? 1, 2... So December 15th, January 15th, about 3 months away.
Oh, you're good at math.
Good at math. 3 months away from the brand new 2023 MLR season. So we got to start getting this thing rolling and start getting our league ready to go. And like I said, to all of you who are listening and watching who aren't in a fantasy MLR league as of yet, stay tuned, keep watching and keep following us on socials. We'll make an announcement when we are able to expand this outside of our main league. with that being said, I need all of our current league members of the official Fantasy Ruckers League to pay attention here, and even people who aren't listening, because there may be an opportunity for you as well. For all of you who are listening, I do need our league members to start reaching out to me, whether that's my personal Discord account or the Fantasy Ruckers Discord account, and sending a message that you are still interested to participate in the 2023 year. We're going to try to make this as interactive and as I guess busy and what's the word I'm looking for? Engaging as possible. So we're really looking for members who are going to be, spurring up conversation, posting things about the week, talking about the games, willing to come on the show. Once again, we've had a bunch of great league members come on the show, from Steven to Fitzy on Rugby Morning, to John, who won our last year's league, got his name on our inaugural Barbarians Fantasy Ruckers League winning jersey right here. Hokies hopped on the show, whole bunch of great members, and we love having them on. We love having those conversations. So we're going to start getting that going. Please reach out to either the my personal account, Discord, at Ryan J. Yee, or on the Fantasy Ruckers Discord account, and just say, hey, we are in for the 2023 year. And then once we have kind of those numbers, we'll then start rolling the infrastructure and the format for the upcoming season when it comes to drafting, when it comes to other things that we're hoping to improve on from our inaugural season. But hearing all that, man, does that get you pumped up for the upcoming year? It's coming fast, dude.
I mean, look, hey, if you're signing up, you're just signing up to lose to me and Vandy. That's all I gotta say.
The history may not suggest that, but I won't say anything, and maybe you'll catch the new guys off guard.
Just remember, the latest thing in history was me making it to the finals of the Fantasy Rucker Playoff Bracket Challenge.
That is true.
That was me.
Yep, short memory there. But super exciting stuff. So league members, please reach out to me if you're interested and continuing in this amazing project. Obviously, like we've said all the time, with this whole Fantasy Ruckers project, Fantasy Rugby, making a reality in the MLR would not be possible without our league members, without our community members, and without any of you listeners or viewers. We really have appreciated all the support when it comes through this, I guess, almost full year that we've been around. 44 episodes in. It's been a super fun ride for Vandy, for you. It's been a super fun ride, and we hope to keep this thing going and year after year make Fantasy MLR that much closer to becoming a reality, because I know people are asking for it. I know what's it called, Marcel Brackey was asking for it last week. So there are definitely people out there. People have reached out to me on direct message too, hoping that we introduce a brand new league, and we are trying, and hopefully one day we will get there. But baby steps here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Yep, that's for sure.
Any last words?
Oh, I mean, hey, look, maybe I'll just bring back the old MLR. Help us out, please.
All right. Well, that being said, no episode next week. Or an early Thanksgiving vacation for the Yee brothers. Vandy will be off as well, so you'll have to miss us for this next week. But hey, I think we will have a Thanksgiving episode. Usually we don't have those holiday episodes, but we may come back here with a Thanksgiving episode to treat you guys on your holiday week. But until then, make sure you start doing your homework. Make sure you start looking at what the possibilities are for this upcoming 2023 fantasy draft, because things are moving and things are going to make an impact, a big impact in this upcoming fantasy year. It's just figuring out who's going to be right about those impacts that are going to be made. That's going to be an interesting one to try to figure out. But with that being said, for Vandy, who's up in the books trying to figure out the next breaking MLR news, for Matt Yee, who is so kind enough to join me in the official Fantasy Ruckers Studio, I'm Ryan Yee, and we will see you guys in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.